welcome back to another true crime video. Sorry it took me so long to upload. As I'm sure you all know, life can get a little crazy, but as promised, I'm back, and today's video is a doozy, so get ready. For those of you who may be new here, I am TR Dominguez, and on this channel I talk about true crime cases, more specifically cases from my hometown, Utah. According to the Utah Bureau of Criminal Identification, there are more than 400 cold cases across the state, and we're going to talk about them. Hopefully by doing so, we can keep these stories alive and maybe along the way, bring the victims and their loved ones justice. Before getting started, I want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no harm or disrespect. This is simply information that I have gathered for the sole purpose of spreading awareness and hopefully getting justice. I always encourage you to do your own research as well. And with all of that being said, let's just jump right into it. Today we are talking about the murder of Doris Vasquez Hernandez. And let me just say right now, this case really pisses me off. I mean, don't get me wrong, they all do. The cases that we talk about here are absolutely heartbreaking, but man, as I got deeper and deeper into this one, it just really grinded my little gears, so I will try to keep it professional. Sadly, I could not find much about Doris. I don't know her parents' names, I don't know if she had any siblings, and I don't even know her exact date of birth. I do know that she was born in 1977, making her only 24 years old at the time that she was brutally murdered. She moved to Salt Lake from Guadalajara, Mexico in the summer of 2001. I don't know for sure what her reasoning was for coming to America, but I'm assuming that it was the same as many others, and that was to get a job, go to school, start a life here. As far as I know, she came here by herself. She didn't come here with her parents or any family, and she was staying with a couple and their child, whom I'm assuming were like friends of the family. I'm not really sure how she knew them. And they were living in a home located at 4947 South Southridge Drive in Taylorsville, Utah. And just so you know, I'm going to be doing a lot of assuming in today's video because unfortunately there isn't a lot of information regarding these little details, and it frustrates me to no end. But regardless of all the details that we don't have, we're just gonna try and push through. So on December 25th, Christmas Day of the year 2001, Doris had plans to meet with friends, but she never showed, and nobody was able to get a hold of her, which was obviously very worrisome. So they decided to go to her house to check on her, and that's when they made a gruesome discovery, and police were called at around 1:40 p.m. Doris was found in her bedroom. She had been strangled to death, and it appeared to be an overall pretty brutal scene. Salt Lake County Sheriff Lieutenant Robbie Russo said, quote, "I can say the woman's death was very violent," end quote. There were obvious signs of trauma, and it was also believed that Doris was killed in the early morning hours of the December 25th and had been dead for several hours before she'd been discovered. Blood samples were taken from Doris's hand, sock, and sweatshirt and were determined to have blood belonging to a man by the name of Juan Fernando Leal Cervantes. It turns out that Cervantes was an acquaintance of Doris's and only lived a few blocks away. I'm not exactly sure how long it took professionals to get DNA results from the clothing, or if Cervantes was even considered a suspect in the case before that. But the search for him began Thursday, December 27th, 2 days after Doris was murdered. Investigators found out that he left his Taylorsville home the morning of the killing, returning to his wife later that day, where I guess she learned, quote, "something bad had happened and he had to leave town," end quote. Cervantes was last seen driving a dark-colored 1994 Pontiac Grand AM. His car was later found in Las Vegas, where apparently he offered it to somebody in exchange for a ride to Mexico. And yeah, that's where the story ends. There is a warrant out for Cervantes in Salt Lake City for murder, but charges weren't even filed against him until August 16th of 2004. Yes, 2004. Can anybody riddle me that? They were looking for him 2 days after her murder, but waited like 3 years to file charges against him. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here. If Cervantes was caught, prosecutors asked that his bail be set at $500,000 and $7. The last $7 was an indication that they didn't want the bail lowered. Kind of weird, I've just never heard of that before, but I'll take it. Okay, so I really don't even know where to begin, honestly. I guess let's talk about Juan Fernando Leal Cervantes. I could not find much about that gem, and let me tell you, it was not for lack of effort. We do know that he was born October 10th, 1977, making him the same age of Doris at the time she was killed, and 44 years old at this point. I'm not sure where he was born, what he did for work, or if he has kids. It's said that he was married, but I couldn't find any record of that either. What we do have record of is his arrest in March of 1999 in South Salt Lake City for domestic violence. He pled guilty to the charge and was sentenced to probation and a fine. 2 months later, he violated his probation by testing positive for cocaine and marijuana. I guess there was a warrant issued for his arrest in September of 1999, but it was never served, so that's awesome. I don't know exactly how Doris and Cervantes knew each other, but I would really like to know. They were the same age, like, did they know each other from work? Was he a friend of the family's? Did the people she was living with introduce them so that she could, I don't know, have some friends here? I would just really love to know the dynamic behind that relationship because, as I said, Cervantes was apparently married or at least in some type of relationship. And I mean, maybe he and Doris were just friends and he was showing her how to adjust to life here. I don't know. I just have so many questions, but let's just go ahead and address the major ones. Like, what time did he get to Doris's house the day of the murder? Doris was discovered at approximately 1:40 p.m., but they believe that she was likely killed several hours before. So does that mean 6, 7, 8 in the morning? Because then that leads to my next question. How would the people that she was living with not notice anything? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. In the articles that I read, it said that the couple that she was living with went to a Christmas Eve party and went straight to bed once they got home. And when they woke up in the morning, they immediately went to go visit others. So let's dissect that a little bit. Anybody who knows of or has lived in a Hispanic household knows that the real celebration is usually on Christmas Eve. That's considered the big day where you eat lots of food, have festivities, and open presents. Christmas Day is more of just the chill day where you hang out and eat leftovers, and that's just the way I've always known it to be. I could be wrong. Feel free to let me know down in the comments below. So I'm definitely not questioning the fact that they went to a party. I'm sure they did, and I'm sure they got home very late and were very tired. I do wonder why Doris didn't go to the party with them. But more importantly, what time did they get home? Had Cervantes already been there by that time? Was Doris already dead? One thing that I just can't seem to comprehend is them waking up and immediately leaving without saying a word to Doris. No, good morning, have a good day, nothing. I mean, maybe they did leave really early and just didn't want to wake her. I don't know. And I'm sure that there are basic answers to a lot of these questions, but we don't have them, and it just sucks because I feel like if we did, Doris would be a lot closer to receiving justice. Another fascinating element to me in this story is Cervantes' wife, girlfriend, whoever. Like I said, I could never find any record that he was married, let alone any name for this mystery woman. If it was in fact his wife, I wonder how long they were married and if she was the victim of the domestic violence charges against Cervantes in 1999. It is a strong possibility, so I will try to be empathetic when I say that I feel like she may have known more information than she initially let on. It was said that she told investigators that Cervantes left the morning of the killing and came back with blood and scratches on her face and told her that he had to leave town. Do we know around what time this was? Of course not. Why would we? But I do feel like her statement is helpful in establishing a timeline and answering a few of the questions that I had. Stick with me here. She said that Cervantes left in the morning and came back later that day with injuries to his face. Doris's body was discovered at approximately 1:42 in the afternoon. Investigators believe that she had been dead for several hours. The exact definition of several is more than 2, but not many. And I don't know what number qualifies as many, but I'm just gonna guess like 5. So for argument's sake, we'll say that Doris was killed around 4 hours before she was found, putting her time of death at around 9:42 a.m. Again, totally not saying this is what happened. I just have to try and fill in some of the blanks for my own sanity. And if that's even close to being the case, then the story starts to make a little more sense to me. The people that she was living with probably woke up that morning and saw Doris before leaving and didn't just immediately leave the house upon waking up, as the news articles make it seem. And Cervantes came over after they left, at which point things went very wrong. It is also worth mentioning that 1 out of like the 5 sources I could find claims that her roommate was out of state for the holiday. So maybe they weren't even in town when this happened, but it says roommate as in singular, and we do know that she was living with a couple and their child. I don't know, it's just frustrating that there's even conflicting statements when it comes to that. I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously the public shouldn't know every detail of a case, but it's like, this happened 21 years ago. They already know who did it. I would just think that they would have given out a little more details regarding the when and where he was last seen, maybe a picture of the guy, so people in the area around that time that maybe saw him could call in and give investigators any information as to his location or even prior whereabouts. Again, I'm not a professional, so don't come for me, but I do feel like there were a lot of missed opportunities in this case by investigators, like waiting 3 years to file charges in a murder case. And it's like, I can't find a picture of Cervantes anywhere. How is there no picture of a man wanted for murder? And it's just sucks, because it's like, how is anybody supposed to help? Something else that I found very frustrating when reading up on this case is the names. Doris's middle and last name is spelled differently in almost every article, and Juan is referred to as both Juan and Fernando Leal Cervantes. And when you look up his warrant for the murder charge, it's under Fernando specifically, not Juan. Trust me, I looked. There are warrants out for Juan Cervantes's, but it's not this guy. So I'm curious if he was somehow able to slip through the cracks by simply going by Juan instead of Fernando. Because when I tell you that I've looked this guy up to no end, I'm not exaggerating. And upon finding a whole lot of nothing, I did find something that I thought was interesting. When doing a basic Google search of his name, I came across a website that had record of him, and I know that it was him because it was the same date of birth, and the address that I believed him to be living at the time was reported as one of his previous addresses, which was 4390 West, 5500 South Kearns. And what was interesting is that there were other addresses listed as well, and one of them was reported years after the crime occurred in 2008. And that address was 1501 West Fox Park Drive in West Jordan. And when I did a Google search of that address, I found out that it is actually an apartment building called Stonebridge Apartments, but the address is actually 1601 West Fox Park Drive instead of 1501. Either way, I thought that it was interesting that there were addresses linked to him in 2008, 7 years after Doris's murder and 4 years after charges were filed against him. So there is a Facebook page dedicated to finding Doris's killer, and I decided to send them a message kind of relaying what I had found with a link to the website, and I didn't hear anything back. So I called the number that was listed on the page and I left them a message, and I still didn't hear anything back. So I decided to message the Utah Cold Case Coalition, and they actually got back to me very quickly, basically just thanking me for the tip. By no means did I think I had cracked the case or anything. If I was able to pull up this basic information myself, I'm sure that the actual professionals were able to do so as well, plus a lot more. I just thought that it was interesting and I felt like I needed to say something. And really, this was all I was able to dig up on Cervantes, so I purchased a subscription to Truthfinder, hashtag not sponsored, which, for those of you who don't know what Truthfinder is, it's basically a website that allows you to enter a person's name, and it basically runs a background check on them. And when I tell you, I was so excited thinking that I was finally gonna find something, and I was extremely let down. Literally, I found more running a background check on myself. I wasn't even able to find a warrant for his arrest on there, yet I could find a speeding ticket that I received 3 years ago. So yeah, I don't really know what that's all about. Maybe it's because the name is under Juan and not Fernando. But I did find record of him purchasing the home in Kearns. And the recording date for the purchase was April 17th of the year 2000 for the sale amount of $102,477. And he put the ownership relationship type as a married man. So apparently he was married. Now, all of this information I'm telling you may seem trivial, but something that I thought was worth noting was that he bought the house under the name Juan Liel Cervantes. So this brings up the name thing again. The warrant is for Fernando, not Juan. Does this matter? I think it might. I also think that it's worth mentioning that the house was bought by a mortgage lender on August 20th of 2001, so roughly 4 months before he murdered Doris. So unless there's some type of mistake with the dating, which I don't think there is, there's no way that he lived there at the time he committed the crime. So where was he living? Well, he's linked to another address, 3986 West, 4990 South, Taylorsville, Utah, which is an incredibly short distance from where Doris lived. It's about a 1-minute drive. So I believe that this is where he was living, but a man by the name of Rodolfo, I won't say the last name, was the owner of the home at the time and remained so until 2005. So it's like, with every answer, I have a dozen more questions. Who was Rodolfo to Cervantes? And did Cervantes' wife continue to live there after he fled? And if so, how long? Maybe Cervantes and his wife were simply renting from Rodolfo and not actually living with him. I don't know. All I know is that he was linked to this address around that time. And this case just bothers me so much because it's like, we know who did it and we can't find them. Articles have also said that they don't know for sure that Cervantes is even in Mexico. And thinking about it, you would almost think that going to Mexico would be just as dangerous for him because he's essentially going back to where Doris's family's at, and you would think that they're probably looking for him there too. And the fact that it's believed that he fled to Mexico definitely makes finding him more difficult, but it doesn't make it impossible. In January of this year, 2 men were extradited back to Utah from Mexico for crimes that they had committed here. One of the men extradited was 27-year-old Fortunato Villagrana, and he is accused of shooting and killing 16-year-old Paris Gustin in Salt Lake City in 2016. Paris and his friends were throwing eggs at vehicles when they hit Villagrana in the ear with an egg while he was in his car. So he went back to his house, got an AK-47, and went out with his friend, who was identified as Martin Cruz, to go out and look for the kids. Once they located the car, Villagrana allegedly leaned out of the passenger window while Cruz was driving and began firing at the vehicle. Gustin was struck by a bullet and died. Villagrana fled in the early morning hours following the killing. And Paris's mom, Ashley Carter, was very active in the search for Villagrana. She paid for Facebook advertisements to publicize a wanted poster of Villagrana in Mexico. And you can basically pay them to boost your posts in certain areas, so she focused on Mexico. And a witness ended up contacting her with Villagrana's location, and she turned that information over to the U.S. Marshals, and he was eventually located and arrested. The other man who was extradited was 41-year-old Juan Arreola Murillo. He is accused of killing 2 women exactly 2 years apart, and he was finally connected to the crimes by DNA analysis. Murillo is accused of killing 29-year-old Sonia Maia On February 9th of 2006, Sonia's husband came home to find her lifeless body inside of their bedroom. She had been strangled with the ligature that was still around her neck, and she was 6 months pregnant at the time. The baby unfortunately also died. Sonia's husband also reported that her keys, rings, and a religious pendant were all missing. When investigating the home, police found Cheetos spilled over the entryway, both inside and out of the front door, and a discarded bag and Coke bottle were also found inside. Her husband said that they didn't drink Coke and they didn't have any Cheetos in the house. Latin prints were taken from the Cheetos bag and Coke bottle and entered into government databases, but did not immediately yield an identity. The day of the killing, a neighbor reported seeing a Hispanic male talking to Sonia right outside her apartment before, quote, grabbing Sonia by the throat and hitting her on the side of the head. Sonia then fell inside of the apartment. The man entered the apartment and kicked the door shut, end quote. My thoughts when reading this was, did he call the cops when he saw that? And if not, why? And if so, how did the cops not catch this guy before he went on to commit this next crime? Exactly 2 years later, on February 9th, 2008, 57-year-old Damiana Castillo was found by officers inside of her home located on South Redwood Road in West Valley. She was found by the front door and also had a ligature mark around her neck. A small table was overturned near the front door, indicating a struggle occurred. The contents of her purse were dumped onto the couch and her jewelry boxes had been disturbed. Her cause of death was asphyxiation by strangulation. And investigators also recovered a fingerprint on Damiana's wallet, as well as a DNA profile from the ligature around her neck. The DNA profile was consistent with the DNA found on the Cheetos bag and Coke bottle inside Sonia's apartment. Because of the strength in the DNA and fingerprint evidence found in Sonia's case, prosecutors filed a John Doe information and warrant for his arrest in February of 2010, assuming that one day he would be found. According to court records, it wasn't until 2016 that the database provided the identification of Marullo as the source of the fingerprints. The prints were manually compared, and the prints on the Cheetos bag matched his right index finger. The print on the Coke bottle was identified as his right thumb, and the print found on Damiana's wallet was identified as his right middle finger. It turns out that 8 months after Damiana's murder, Marullo was deported and hadn't returned back to the U.S. Salt Lake County District Attorney Sam Gill said that the paper trail from Marullo's deportation in October of 2008 allowed detectives to connect the dots and make an arrest, but declined to explain how Marullo's prints came to be in the FBI's database that resulted in the match. So yeah, I am very happy that Paris, Sonia, and Damiana are in the process of receiving justice. I was actually planning on covering their stories on the channel before they were solved, but I still wanted to share them with you because it does go to show that justice can still be served, and simply running away from the crime doesn't stop that from happening. You don't just get to leave from where a crime occurred and expect to get away with it. Although I wasn't able to find much about Doris or what she was like, she was a beautiful 24-year-old woman who was viciously murdered on Christmas Day, and she did not deserve that. According to the Facebook page dedicated to finding Cervantes, there is a cash reward for any information leading to his location, and I will leave a link to that Facebook page in the description box below. I'm sure that it's been very difficult for Doris's parents or any of her family to advocate for her, being as they are so far from where the crime took place. That's why I think that it's so important that we continue to talk about this case and keep her story alive. I hate thinking about the events that took place that day, how they unfolded, or how long Doris was afraid and fighting for her life. But one thing's for sure, she did fight, and the brutality of the scene shows that. She was only 5'3" and around 120 pounds, and his DNA was found on her hands, her sock, her sweatshirt. She was a fighter, and it's beyond time that somebody fight for her. It's not fair that she came here looking for a better life, and not only did Cervantes take that from her in the worst possible way, but he's walking around freely facing no consequences for it. And with this case in particular, I know that there's more than one person out there that knows where Cervantes is. Doris deserves justice and her family deserves closure. People with any information as to Cervantes' whereabouts should call the Salt Lake City Unified Police Department at 801-840-4000. You can also reach out to the Facebook page for Doris that I will link down below. Like I said, I didn't have much luck. You can also reach out to the Utah Cold Case Coalition at 1-888-250-2653. And you can get in touch with them anonymously at 385-258-3313. Thank you all so much for listening to Doris's story. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I promise I will be back with another Utah case.